joining in today's live stream show. I know we have tons of very dedicated followers of the Dan Markel murder case who are just so riveted, and we're eating up any information we can find out about the case. So people are excited to hear from you, and thank you for being here. So, can you tell us a little bit about your background first and how you wound up going to law school?
Sure, Judy. I I came from a family. People who follow the case may know I practiced with my father, David Collins. My father was an attorney. I grew up actually in South Florida, in Miami-Dade County. My father was an assistant state attorney for then State Attorney Janet Reno, who ended up obviously becoming the U.S. Attorney General during the Clinton administration. So it was just something that I kind of fell into. I'm sure my dad would have rather me have gone to medical school. Just never really excelled in math and science, so ended up going to law school. Went to undergrad at the University of Florida. Uh, After I graduated from there, I attended law school at Florida A&M, actually in Orlando. Was a prosecutor down there for a couple of years, and then decided to come back home up here and go into practice with my father. I've been practicing. It's a general practice because I practice out of a small rural county called Jefferson County to the east of Tallahassee. It's mainly a general practice, but we do concentrate pretty heavily in criminal trial practice and appeals. So that's kind of a broad overview of my practice.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you became Luis Rivera's attorney?
Yes, ma'am. Not much to it, really. Every circuit in Florida, every judicial circuit has what's called a registry, which is a list of attorneys who, when a indigent defendant who is being prosecuted uh, needs representation and the public defender's office can't afford them representation because of a conflict of interest, there is a registry. There's a very specific registry for attorneys who are what are called capital qualified in the state of Florida. That means when the state is seeking the death penalty as a potential punishment in a case. So it's on a rotation randomly if you're on the list. So it was just pure random that I had been assigned to Mr. Rivera's case, and that's how I became involved.
Hmm. Yes. So was it sometime in July of 2016 that you got appointed?
That sounds right, Judy. As I think I alluded to prior to coming on, I do not have the file in front of me, so to speak.
Hmm.
I'm here,
Yeah.
not at the office, obviously.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you know the date better than I do.
When you find out that you're appointed to represent someone, what do you do next in general?
Well, you find out as much information about the case as you can, and you go meet your client. You go from there.
Hmm. Well, where was he? Wasn't he in a federal prison somewhere else?
No, man. By the time I first met Mr. Rivera, he was already at the Leon County Jail, to the best of
Oh,
my recollection. Yes.
I see. Yeah. And can you describe to us, like, what's the jail like? I think a lot of people are interested in, what is jail like, especially now that Charlie Adelson is living there.
Well, uh, jail's jail. I don't know really how to describe it. It's it's a big building. It's got bars, very little windows, very little contact with the outside world. It's not a pleasant place. Uh, how it's portrayed on TV, is that necessarily 100% accurate? No, I don't know. It's not a good place to be.
Hmm. Yeah. And so, what's the setup like when attorneys need to meet with their clients in that jail?
Well, I mean, it varies. It varies with what type of defendant you're meeting. Obviously, there can be defendants with mental health issues or regular health issues, or someone like Mr. Rivera, who at that point in time did have a co-defendant or was about to have a co-defendant or had a co-defendant while he was being housed there in a very high profile case. So the conditions, if you're asking what Mr. Rivera was facing while he was in the Leon County Jail, I would safely state that they were much more stringent. Maybe not as much liberty not as many liberties he had as an inmate at Leon County Jail as compared to other normal inmates. If that makes sense, in terms of access maybe to television, telephones, things of that nature.
Mm-hmm. I see. And are you able to tell us, what were your impressions of Mr. Rivera when you first met him? Or do you even remember? I know you have
Yeah,
hundreds
I
and
do
thousands
remember.
of clients. Yeah.
He was a little tiny guy for what you read prior to going and visiting him, and knowing how horrendous the whole thing was, and reading about the affiliations with other criminal groups, gangs. I think in your mind you picture some big thug, hardened criminal, and my impression was he was a little tiny guy, and it went from there. When you're dealing with someone like Mr. Rivera, facing what he was, they're they're observing you just as much as you're observing them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
They're really watching you just as much as you're watching them, and they're trying to make estimations, gauging your character, your credibility, if they can trust you and believe you. So we took it pretty slow with Lewis, and I believe, well, I know I gained his trust, and we were able to have a good attorney-client relationship.
Mm-hmm. Well, how many times did you meet with him roughly before he decided
Uh,
he was going to do the proffer?
I honestly don't know.
Mhm,
I spent a lot of time with Lewis.
mhm.
I spent times with him at the Leon County Jail. He had been transferred over to the Jefferson County Jail, in the county of which my office was in for quite some time. I don't know how many times. I'm sure. I believe I've seen or heard that certain trips that we may have made in a van to various parts of the state. I think those are all public record now, and people have
Yeah.
observed those. I don't know how much time I spent with Lewis, but if you're asking how much time I spent with him before he gave the proffer, I don't think it was very long.
Mhm.
It wasn't a
Yeah.
great it wasn't a great deal of time, and the reason why I say that is I know at one point in time, I believe we had filed a demand for speedy trial. So my whole representation of him did not last incredibly long.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of surprised about when I saw the information on Deep Dive True Crime recently.
Yeah,
It looks like the drive along, at least a video I saw when you guys were driving past Trescott Drive, that was September 30th, I think, 2016.
sure.
And I saw a news article where you had asked for a change of venue, and that was also in September. Wasn't
Yeah.
that September 2016 also? So
Yes,
so
ma'am.
it's like your trial was scheduled for October at first, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
So
that sounds
everything,
accurate. Yeah.
yeah, everything just happened so quickly. It was like in a blink of an eye almost. So your representation of him ultimately was just what, like 3 months, 2 months?
Yes, ma'am. That sounds about
Wow.
right. Rivera's case was a little different from what I remember, and you may know more than me at this point, because it was apparent that the government was interested in cooperating, but we didn't know if anyone else was cooperating at that point in time. So what we tried to do, one of the things we did, is we filed a demand for speedy trial to try to shorten the amount of time in which other potential people could cooperate. And it really gave us the benefit of being able to get a good cooperation deal quite quickly, because the government knew that we were going to be going to trial, and it acted as a severance. So we would be the sole party going to trial at that point in time. The other parties would get a complete preview of the state's case. And it made the government really have, I think, a good incentive to give Mr. Rivera the best deal possible, if
Mhm.
that makes sense.
Yes, I see. Yeah, thanks for that information. And at what point does it start getting videotaped? because something was definitely videotaped that we can see also on.
Yes, and that videotape, I have seen it on the news here and there. I believe that was at the Jefferson County Jail, if I'm not mistaken. Uh, I don't know. I don't even know if that was intentionally videotaped or if that was just surveillance video from the jail. I really don't know, nor do I remember.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there was no formal point where it's like, okay, let's get Lewis in this room and let's turn on the camera and start
No,
recording.
no, ma'am.
I see. Okay. Yeah. Well, in terms of that whole ride along where you and Lewis had to be in a van driving all around Tallahassee, can you tell us how that day went?
That was the longest day ever. It wasn't just Tallahassee. Uh,
Oh,
if I remember, that
you were
van
looking
went.
for the gun, right?
Yeah, that van went. When was to Naples? I mean, we went all the way down 75 before we got to the alley, which is the tip of Florida. For those of y'all don't live
Oh,
down here, uh, they the government believed, and I'm not trying to make statements about their belief, but they believed that they could put Luis Rivera in a van years after this had happened,
yeah.
knowing that he's completely illiterate, not completely illiterate, but can't read, write real good, doesn't have a real good sense of direction, geography, things of that nature. But nonetheless, they believe they could put him in the van those years later, and he would be able to pinpoint where the firearm, if I'm not mistaken, was
Yeah.
thrown out.
Yeah.
So, uh, what had happened, I believe, initially, and I'm sure you know all this, is we had suggested that maybe they look at the first body of water, navigable river east of Tallahassee on I-10. And they did. They looked in the Osceola River, if I'm not mistaken, on the Jefferson Madison County line, just 2 counties over from Tallahassee, and they found a firearm. And it was the type of firearm that had been sitting there for so long. It obviously wasn't the murder weapon, but it was in such a deteriorated state, if I'm not mistaken, that they could not rule it out right away.
Mm.
So it also initially gave Mr. Rivera a lot of credibility with that as well. But that wasn't it. And we stopped at probably every body of water on I-10 or I-75 all the way to Naples, trying to see if Mr. Rivera could confirm that's where the weapon may have been.
Was that over the span of one day or multiple days?
That was over the span of about 18 hours. There may
Oh,
have been, I think what you're confusing, if I recall, there were probably 2 trips in a van with me and Lewis. I
mhm.
believe there was one trip where we went through Tallahassee.
Yes, that's the one I saw on Deep
Okay.
Dive True Crime.
Well, there was another one.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh. But then in the interim, I mean, I part of my stupidity, but I'm assuming, Lewis had to be guarded at all times. And so he had to be like brought back to the jail and then pick him up from the jail again for the second trip. And, but I mean, from a logistics standpoint, while they're running outside the van trying to look for a gun, what were you and Lewis doing? Just trapped in the van together?
Well, we had a lot of law enforcement officers, obviously, with us.
Mhm.
But yeah, we spent a lot of time in the van together.
Uh-huh. Okay. Well, what if he needed to eat something? Then what did they do? Just bring him fast food in the van?
Pretty much.
Uh-huh. I see. Were his ankles shackled also? I'm assuming his hands were shackled.
Yes. I mean, he was completely restrained. We were in the company of many heavily armed law enforcement officers.
Hmm. Well, that just sounds like a very stressful situation. And I mean,
It was
wow.
an unusual situation.
Yeah, what a day. I mean, how often do you have to be in that kind of situation for your clients where you're stuck in a van with them for
Making
hours on
mem-
end?
making memories. I have never been in that situation before.
Well, were you making small talk with Lewis during that time or getting to know him personally? Or? or just kind of sitting there in silence because you knew everything was being recorded?
I mean, Judy, you make small talk. After about 8, 9 hours, though, you're really done with small talk and just want this nightmare of a road trip to be over with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see. Because I guess you couldn't listen to music or just zone out or anything. Not
No,
really.
it wasn't a luxury vehicle,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. And when you're a court appointed attorney for these types of cases, don't you guys get paid a flat fee, or is there a way to get paid by the hour?
Some of these lawyers, I guess they know ways to put together these incredible bills. I guess there are ways to exceed the statutory cap. In the Trying to think of how long I've handled these types of cases at this point. I think it's 11, 12 years maybe. I've never exceeded the statutory cap once.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I never have.
Yeah. But what I'm wondering is, do the attorneys just get paid a flat fee regardless of how many hours a case takes them?
There's a flat fee, and then I believe there is a basis somewhere in the statute that if you believe that you've worked so many hours in excess of what is just under the flat fee, that you can petition the court for what's called extraordinary fees.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I see. Yeah, so the answer is no, you normally don't get
I,
paid.
I did. I see the exact question, and the question to that lady is, no, ma'am, I did not get paid by the hour. I got paid a flat fee. The flat fee
Mm-hmm.
by statute, I can tell you right now, was $25,000.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the
Yeah.
government paid me to represent Mr. Rivera.
So the change, you made a motion for change of venue, which was denied. Do you think at this point that, say, Charlie Adelson's attorney might make a motion for change of venue and get it granted, or is that very, very rare in Florida?
Well, that's the answer to the question. Would I expect his attorney to file a motion for change of venue? Yes.
Yeah.
I think that would be expected. Would it be granted? I don't know. This case, it's so wild in that it's gotten so much media attention, even all these years after it. And I understand what a terrible tragedy it was. I truly do, and how just crazy it was. But do every common day people who would be on a venire panel have that much intimate knowledge of it? I don't know. And that's really what it comes down to. How much do they really know about it? And is it of such a nature that they would not be able to be fair and impartial? And in my experience, those are generally denied pre-trial unless just something extraordinary that you can show the court. And it's something that if you believe after you've got in there in jury selection and started to select a jury, and you are running into issues where there has been so much media attention, and it has become now more apparent that you can't receive fair and impartial jurors, then that would be something you would renew at that point in time, and then potentially have it granted. But I believe a motion for change of venue has been filed, I think, prior to every one of these trials at this point in time now, probably. And
Yeah,
I don't think
probably. I don't know exactly.
I don't think I mean, it hasn't been granted either time, so I don't know why the next time it would, if that makes sense. Seen Mr. Rivera since my representation ended of him. I take that back. I may have seen him once since when he had been brought over here. I have had correspondence with him. Without getting into the nature of the correspondence, all I know is that he is under a lot of pressure, obviously. I do believe he is genuinely in fear for his life. I don't have any knowledge of any specific incidents, though.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Brittany said, did Lewis seem remorseful?
Yes, he did. And I know that probably seems not believable. Uh, if I wasn't saying it, I probably wouldn't find it believable either, if that makes sense. But knowing, what his background was, his affiliation with a gang, but yes, in my experience, Mr. Rivera was incredibly remorseful.
To what extent did Lewis's or anyone's level of remorse factor into the deal they get from the state?
Well,
Does that count for anything? Remorse?
I would say in most cases it absolutely does. Was his remorse a factor in the deal he got in this case? I don't think that really had anything to do with it. I think what he had going for him in the deal that he got was the time situation. By filing that demand for speedy trial and being out in front of everyone, and the state knowing that they needed more evidence from someone to get other people, and with that shortened period of time and the credible evidence that he did give them, that's what got him the deal he got.
Did Lewis's comment that he didn't want to mess with kids or he didn't want to, I think he said something about how he felt bad because he didn't want to kill somebody over some effing kids.
I think that might have been one of the things that made him spill the beans, so to speak. Mr. Rivera had kids. I think maybe one of the reasons why, and this is speculation, not anything he told me, one of the reasons why he did his involvement in this case was probably for a certain extent because he thought it was a way he could provide for his family. I know that sounds terrible by killing someone else's father. I don't condone it nor approve of it, but I think that was one of the reasons why he was involved in this, and I think that weighed on him a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And similarly, I don't know if you can answer this, but how did Lewis exhibit remorse? I mean, he was almost crying on the stand, actually. Shed some tears.
I didn't know. He just seemed very genuine. It wasn't a situation in which you really had to pull information from him, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So he wanted to share the information.
Yes.
Yeah.
I had mentioned last time on your show, each circuit in Florida has what's called a capital registry, attorneys that are qualified to handle cases in which the death penalty is being sought as a potential punishment. My father and I are both on the registry in the Second Circuit, in which Mr. Rivera's case was prosecuted. So it's just on rotation. It was just the sheer luck of the draw, if you want to call it that I got appointed.
Mm-hmm. Well, why is it that he didn't get a public defender?
He initially had the public defender's office, and the public defender's office filed a motion certifying that they had a conflict of interest in that they either represented a witness in the case previously or had some other affiliation with someone who was associated with the case where the rules of professional conduct would not allow them to represent Mr. Rivera.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you got notice that you were assigned to be his attorney. Was your father also appointed?
What happens is they initially appoint one attorney. And then in Florida, when you're an indigent defendant, you're entitled to have co-counsel, two attorneys in a capital case. So I filed a motion to have my father, David, appointed as my co-counsel in representing Mr. Rivera.
Mm-hmm. I see. But you were the only one with him in that big van ride, right?
I was the only one with them on the van ride. My senior partner elected not to make that road trip with us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So can you tell us more about your impressions of Lewis?
Yes, ma'am. His association with other organizations, I think, is pretty well documented. That I don't think I need to elaborate on any further. That speaks for itself. But as far as my impressions of him, he was someone who obviously came from a very troubled past, whether it be from his own doing or just being born into it. And someone who was sincere in what he did in terms of taking responsibility for his actions. And wanting to try to help in the way that he could.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so getting into the questions here, since we are on a time limit, someone asked, when's the best time to offer a client a deal to get them to flip on a co-conspirator?
I don't know if there's any set in stone best time. It really, in my opinion, and I'm sure everyone has a different opinion, depends on the circumstances and the lay of the land. Mr. Rivera's case was very unique in that you had other parties that were being prosecuted at that time, such as Mr. Garcia, and there were other potential suspects who had not been charged at that point in time. And we kind of took the surrounding circumstances that we had and shortened the time period in which other people could potentially cooperate. And it just kind of worked out. It was a very unique situation in terms of who was being prosecuted, who was suspects, who else could potentially cooperate. And it all depends really on a case by case basis.
Mm-hmm. So I know you still have to keep some things confidential, but
Yes, ma'am.
Is it typically the defense attorney who approaches the prosecution to make a deal, or is it typically the prosecution that says, hey, we'll give your guy a deal?
It can be either way. In this case, as I kind of alluded to without getting into any real privileged conversations, we knew that the government had a real interest in speaking with someone who could provide them, obviously, with more information on other people. So it just kind of came together very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how did you communicate the possible deal to the prosecution? Was it like a phone call? Are you on casual good terms with them?
Yeah, I would like to think I'm on good terms with Ms. Kappelman and most people in that office. Obviously, we're all advocates for certain causes and disagree on some things, but I think I have a very good professional relationship with Ms. Kappelman. The actual, when you say deal, if you mean the actual end result, what he was sentenced to, that came over a series of conversations. What he was eventually sentenced to was not what the government had offered initially.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Can you say if it was more favorable for your client or worse?
What he ultimately was sentenced to was the best offer we received from the government.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. And I think most people would say you got him like the deal of a lifetime.
Well, it was a unique case, Judy. It really was. Sometimes I think we're all guilty of Monday morning quarterbacking, so to speak. And there is a part of me that wonders if we had drug on a little longer or waited a little longer, if it could have even been better. I don't know. I feel satisfied in knowing that he did get a good result, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just even as a layperson, personally, I would say 7 years for allegedly getting the gun and driving back and forth to kill somebody. That seems like a pretty good deal to me. So good job. Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's see. Other questions was, okay, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but can you guess why Sigfredo Garcia wasn't called to testify at Charlie's trial?
I really don't know the answer to that. It would merely be speculation.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, there's probably things that he could have offered, obviously, that Mr. Rivera couldn't have offered in testimony based on who he was in a relationship with and maybe what he was more privy to. But I truly don't know the answer to that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it seemed like both of them were heavy drug users. So My guess is that Sigfredo probably has a terrible memory if he even remembers what happened. So
That's probably a very well-founded answer.
Let's see. What about Charlie's trial? You mentioned that you did watch some of it.
I did. I had a little downtime a few days when I was in the office, and I was able to listen to it. Pretty amazing trial. The little bit I did listen to.
Mm-hmm. What did you think of his defense theory that Charlie was being extorted by Katie?
It was not something that I would have contemplated as a potential defense. I don't think anyone really saw that coming. Sometimes these crazy out of left field theories, sometimes they work. So I don't know. That family, I don't know the dynamics of it, obviously, but given what I do know, it seemed evidence-wise, evidence that was in the record that was there, it would have seemed more likely, obviously, that he could have shifted some of the guilt, so to speak, to his sister or other members of the family. Maybe he didn't want to do that, obviously, because they were family members. I don't know. I found it very interesting.
What was your reaction to Charlie's conviction and then Donna's arrest?
Charlie's conviction, I wasn't that surprised with it. I know it's a circumstantial evidence case, but circumstantial evidence can be so damning sometimes, especially when you have so much of it. I wasn't surprised that he was convicted. I don't think that most people were. I don't know. As far as the mother's arrest, the timing of it, I think, was somewhat of a surprise. But other than the timing of it, in terms of when it happened, I wasn't that surprised. I think I alluded to on the last time I spoke with you over a year ago, I believed, and I'm not a prosecutor anymore, I thought that there was ample evidence to indict these people a long time ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And do you think it was due to political pressure that Donna hadn't been arrested sooner?
I don't know. I don't know if it was political pressure, a fear that this last time when she was about to flee, if they would ever be able to get her again. I don't know what goes through our elected state attorney's mind and the timing of things and the way he does things. I would have to believe that they were acting on good information, and they believed that if they didn't move when they did, there would be a good chance of maybe it not happening.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And same question, or another question from Dora. When does or could Lewis get released from prison with good behavior?
Well, he's currently, I believe, still serving a federal sentence in the Bureau of Prisons. And obviously that federal sentence will end and he will still have to serve time in the state, Florida Department of Corrections. Each entity, the federal system and the state system, have different guidelines in terms of potential early release. In Florida, it's pretty much you have to serve a minimum of 85% of your sentence. That's with good behavior. If you have behaved, you could get released with only serving 85% of your sentence. That would apply to him because he was not sentenced to any crimes that carried what we call a minimum mandatory. A minimum mandatory sentence, like if you were sentenced to 10 or 20 years and a minimum mandatory, that would mean that you would have to serve your sentence day for day. You wouldn't be able to get early released. And that's why the number of 19 was so very, very important in his final sentence, because he did not have any minimum mandatories that applied.
Mm-hmm. So that means he could potentially get out a little bit early if he
Yes,
has
ma'am.
good behavior?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I see. Okay, yeah.
Whatever 85% of 19 would be, I haven't done the math, but that with the federal sentence counting towards the time, that would be what he could get out at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I did see this little short note that you had sent to Lewis a couple of years ago, just telling him that you'd be glad to represent him if you were appointed. But then the judge went ahead and denied his motion to get an attorney.
Yes, well, that's public record. That's all part of the
Yes.
record. So speaking on that, I'm not divulging anything. I was contacted by Mr. Rivera about potentially representing him in a capacity in which he was a witness. I believe this has been many years back,
Mm-hmm.
and I had never been appointed in such a situation, but I didn't know of anything ethically or any other way that would prevent me from representing him. I believe that's what you're probably alluding to, is that
Yes.
correspondence.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Is there some sort of witness protection program that Lewis could go into after he gets out because he snitched?
I'm not aware of any state funded here in Florida witness protection program that he would qualify for, or they would offer services to him. I believe that he's going to be on his own.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the witness protection program is only for federal cases?
I'm only aware of such a program in the federal system. I am not aware of any state agency here that would be obligated or be willing to provide services to Mr. Rivera.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. Would Charlie benefit from testifying against Wendy?
I think he could. I definitely think he could. I don't know if he'd be willing to. I think I alluded to the last time I was here. There is a basis in the law in which someone's sentence can be reduced later. So there is definitely a mechanism in place that could provide a benefit, but I don't believe that he will. I mean, we'll see.
But thank you so much, Chuck. I know this was just a blip on your radar. With
Thank you, Judy, and everyone have a happy holiday season. Y'all take care.
You too. Thank you.